So when I was in high school, I played a sport, and because of that, I had to take a weightlifting class, and that meant that every morning I would have to get up before 6 a.m. and get to the church and get ready to get ripped before school started. And I remember even back in middle school when weightlifting was new, all of us were in there, and there's kind of this subtle "I'm better than you" attitude. You know what I'm talking about? If a person put 25-pound plates on either side of the bench press, then if you went after them, you put on a couple extra plates, maybe 5 to 10 pounds, nothing too big, but just to show, I can lift more than you. Yeah, I'll do you one better. It was that little subtle, not subtle power play that was going on. But here's the reality. Power looks different for everyone. For you, power might look like being the one who can captivate a group of people with a story and be the center of attention. Or it might be the power to influence what your friend group does over the weekend, or to influence how you handle the drama that pops up in your friend group. Or maybe power might look like having a later curfew, or finally getting your driver's license, or all access to your phone without parental controls. Or maybe you have an idea of the kind of power that you want but don't have yet. Now think about it for a second. Maybe you dreamt of being captain of your team. Maybe you want to be the first chair in band. Maybe you thought about running for president of student council. Or maybe you're a freshman or a sophomore and you look to those upperclassmen and you can't wait to yield the power that they get. Maybe you took the risk and applied to be the manager of your shift at Dairy Queen, because all of you seem to work at Dairy Queen. The idea of being in a place of power or authority, which is someone who has more power than you do, can be exciting. It can make us feel important, respected, or even intimidating to others. And having power gives us a bit of a sense of control, and who doesn't want that? If we're honest with ourselves, we'd all like to feel powerful because it puts us in control or above someone else. But if you have ever been in a place of power, you know it doesn't always go the way that you imagine, right? Like, even if you have it, there's always someone else who's going to have more, right? You aren't always sure what to do with it if you do get it. And it isn't always as great as you think it's going to be. It can be lonely at the top. And that leaves us with some complicated feelings about power and the people who have it and those who don't. And about why we want it and what to do with it when we do have it. And maybe we feel like it just never quite turns out the way that we think it should. In other words, competing for and then gaining power is complicated. So, what do we do about it? How do we do this in a Christ-like way when it comes to power? Power and authority have been around from the beginning, and it wasn't designed to be as complicated as it sometimes feels. The opening part of the Bible is a book called Genesis, or Origin, and it's the book of origins, who many people believe was written by Moses. And it's about the creation of all things, including human beings. And in it is written something that's pretty incredibly important when it comes to our idea of authority or power. Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our own image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish of the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." That line, "so that they may rule," was written about human beings from the very beginning. According to the writer, humans were literally put on this planet and given power or authority over the rest of creation. Humans, you and me, were designed by God to have the traits of God. That's part of what it means to have God's image in us. And it's with God's image and likeness in us that we are to demonstrate and practice authority. Which sounds great, right? So fast forward to today, and it's easy to see how humans have used power or authority for good, but it's also easy to see the way that humans have turned that upside down and used them not so good. See, power has been used to liberate or help, and it's also been used to oppress or harm entire groups of people. Power has been used to bring peace and start wars that have wiped out millions. Power has been used to create resources that meet people's needs and has been used irresponsibly in a lot of other cases. So, even though power was a part of the deal at creation, humans haven't always used it well. But that wasn't the case with Jesus. Jesus turned the idea of power upside down. Jesus flipped the idea of power upside down in a way that people didn't expect or know what to do with. He did things way differently than the religious leaders of his time, where leaders often fought to be seen as increasingly powerful by putting others down. And Jesus chose not to do that. He did the opposite. Not only that, he did something none of them could pull off. He was killed by those leaders because they didn't like the way he did things. But then, in the biggest power flex possible, he came back to life. In fact, just so that there were no questions, Jesus actually made it really clear what kind of power he had when he said this after the resurrection. He said, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me." I mean, there's really no room for questions when it comes to Jesus' authority. He's like, hey, just in case you were wondering after the whole coming back to life thing, I've been given all authority over everything. And this is good news because it means that he is the perfect example of what being in power looks like. Jesus could have used his power to put down or oppress other people, but instead he used it to do things that people didn't expect. He set out to create an upside-down kingdom where power was used in the way that God had always planned for it to be used. In a culture that was used to things being a certain way, it was upside down that he used his power to show that he honored and valued women. He used it to prove that he wasn't okay with corrupt and evil systems. He used it to heal people who were sick, to hang out with the outcasts of society, to forgive people who had wronged him, to include people who the most powerful people ignored. And he never used his power to make others feel small, hurt, or oppressed. His is an example of power being turned upside down. But also, it's the picture of power used perfectly. No matter what your experience has been with people in authority, or whether you have or haven't handled power so well yourself, Jesus' example shows us how power is supposed to be used and what it's supposed to look like. He has all authority, and he is an authority that we can follow and model when we're given a little bit of power ourselves. He shows us what power and authority in an upside-down kingdom can and should look like. Ultimately, Jesus turned the idea of power upside down. So what does this mean for you and me as we go through life trying to get this right? Well, really the place we can all start is by choosing to rethink the way that we think about power and authority. Why? Because whether we're people who push back against the authority in our lives or people who are looking for opportunities to gain more power than we currently have, chances are we have seen or used power in a way that doesn't reflect the way that God intended for it to be used. So, by rethinking it, we can choose to look to Jesus' example of authority in the way that God has always intended for power and authority to be used. If you're ready to take a new approach to the way that you think about authority, here are a couple ways that I want you to start. First, think about Jesus. Before going after power or going against the people who have authority over you, we should think about the things that we just talked about and the things that Jesus said and did. We should ask ourselves, what made Jesus a good authority figure? And how did he use his power? Then we'll be able to know what to do when we're given a little bit of power ourselves. We'll also know the kinds of authority figures worth following. Then, once you've thought about Jesus' example, you can, secondly, rethink how you use the power that you have. Chances are you have at least some power and influence over someone or something in your life. And think about the ways that you can leverage your power for good. Maybe you can be the one to invite the loner kid at school into the conversation. Maybe you can use your influence to stop a joke when someone else is getting hurt by it. Maybe you can be the person who puts an end to the gossip and shuts down rumors. Don't just talk about it in small group, be about it in real life. And lastly, rethink about the authority figures in your life. Take some time to think about the coaches, teachers, parents, small group leaders, bosses, and whoever else seems to have some kind of power in your life. Maybe you love the way that they use their power, and maybe you don't. Either way, learn to look for the good. Look for the positive things in who they are and the way that they use the authority that they have. Maybe they believe deeply in your potential. Maybe they defend you when you need it most. Maybe they've taught you valuable life lessons. The truth is that authority can be annoying. When you think about the examples that Jesus gave us and you line it up with the ways that people around you use their power, are there things that match up? By rethinking about the authorities in your life, you can change the way that you see them or even change the way you treat those with power moving forward. Now, just to be clear, this does not mean that you should ignore the reality of harmful authority or the harmful ways that people use their power, and we're going to talk more about that next week. There is a difference between authority that's annoying and authority that's harmful. And you might be annoyed that your mom is using her power to ask you to take out the trash, but she's not bad for doing this, as you probably already know. In fact, she's using her power to teach you responsibility, as lame as that sounds. But anyone who uses their power in ways that are harmful to you, someone else, or even to themselves is not using authority in ways that align with Jesus' example. In fact, Jesus spoke out against this kind of authority time and time again. Remember, Jesus turned the idea of power upside down, and he used his authority and his power for the good of other people, to help free the oppressed and to benefit those he had power over. So if you're experiencing the use of power in harmful ways, the best thing to do is to speak up. In fact, my hope is that this group of people is the safest place in the world for you to talk about anything. So say something if you're in a position where authority is being used in harmful ways. So yes, we might get annoyed with those in authority or even find ourselves wanting power in ways that might not be beneficial. But we can be confident that in Jesus we have a perfect example of the way power and authority were intended to be used. He used power in an upside down way. And as we go about our day-to-day lives and as we get older and find ourselves in positions of authority, more often we can choose to rethink the way we think about power and authority. And when we do, we may see our perspectives on people like our parents, bosses, teachers, and coaches begin to change. When we look for the good in our teachers, we may find our class gets better. When we see our coaches in a positive light, we may find ourselves running harder and less tempted to talk back to them. When we see the ways that our parents sacrifice for us, taking out the trash won't feel so annoying. The way that we think about authority can actually change how we experience authority and how people in authority interact with us. Plus, we'll have a better picture of what good authority is supposed to look like when we're in positions of authority and power someday. Why not start to rethink the way that you think about authority and power today? As you guys get ready to head to your small group, I want you to think about your answer to this question. When you think about power, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Love you guys, and you're dismissed to your small groups.